Welcome, everyone. Before we begin, I want to be clear. This episode carries a content warning for domestic violence, filicide, and suicide. So take care of yourself first. Please make sure you're watching when you have the bandwidth and the body budget to receive this episode. Today, I'm sitting with a remarkable woman whose courage, clarity, and wisdom struck me when we first met last October. And I've been wanting to have another conversation ever since. But before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about her. So, Kerrith McDowell is originally from New Jersey and now lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she serves her community as a hospice nurse practitioner. Her profession, of course, has trained her to hold space for grief and loss with extraordinary skill. And yet nothing could have prepared her for the devastating loss of her own sons, River and Jet Collins, to domestic violence, driven by the reality that both law enforcement and mental health systems failed to intervene when it mattered most. Kerrith has turned unimaginable loss into a powerful voice for accountability for her children and for countless families out there who've been failed by the system that was supposed to protect them. And I want to be transparent. Kerrith is a family friend. And when we met last, words like strong and inspiring all felt very, very inadequate. What I witnessed was something so rare, such courage, wisdom, and clarity, as I said, that only comes from having walked through such fire. And I'm so glad you're here, Kerrith. Thank you so much for trusting us with your story.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. So before we begin, I'd like to just take a moment and arrive, have a couple of nourishing breaths, feeling our feet on the ground and maybe our hand on our hearts, feeling the beats. If it feels right, join me as I take a few nourishing breaths and exhaling with a cleansing breath. Beautiful. So let's just dive in. Maybe you can just walk us through the day that you lost your children and what led up to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the day before is pretty significant. Um, I, my husband, I was married to someone with serious mental health issues. We had been trying to, as a family, get the help we needed for those mental health issues, but it seemed like every way we turned, um, asking for support, we kind of the issue of the mental health issues was put back on me or on us as a family. Um, None of the support we were getting was very adequate. My husband, part of his diagnosis was personality traits or what we would know as a personality disorder. And those are very hard to treat. And so oftentimes it was the advice was sort of like, well, if you don't like it, you should leave. I had always felt like leaving might end in something. I thought my husband would kill himself if I left him because he told me that he would. And so I was afraid. I was afraid to leave. I was afraid. My children loved him, and I didn't want to create just this horrific traumatic experience for them. But as the boys got older and became teenagers, my husband started to become more controlling, I think because raising them and them needing him was part of his identity. And so as they became more independent, more autonomous, he became more unraveled and controlling, not just of them, but also of me. And I started to seek a separation. When he learned that I was working with a lawyer to separate, he became even more controlling within the last 2 months of our marriage. Again, not just of me, but of the boys. I felt like the best thing to do was to not make waves inside the home. And I just sort of didn't start fights with the boys or with when the boys were upset with me for leaving, because he would say things like, Mom's tearing our family apart and throwing me away. A lot of parental alienation. And I thought, the only way out is through. The only way I can potentially repair my relationship with my children is to move through the separation and get to another side where we have two separate homes, so they can see me for who I really am and my husband for who he really is and make their own decisions. Um, he got more and more just volatile as we were getting closer to the June 24th, the date that my children died. Um, And I was reaching out to a psychiatrist for help, and a psychiatrist just kept telling me, well, this really seems like marital problems. You guys need a marriage counselor. Um, so I wasn't getting any help there. I had tried to have him involuntarily committed 2 weeks prior because he was making more and more threats of suicide. And when the police picked him up, they took him to like a local satellite ER that didn't have a mental health system or mental health team in place. And the ER doctor, um, Shan told him that I was working on a separation. So it was assumed that I was just trying to get information for like collateral information for my lawyer, and that I wasn't really in danger, even though that is the most dangerous time for women is when they're trying to leave. So he was brought home with the whole entire ER visit was, I've seen the medical records since it was less than 30 minutes that was spent from the time of triage to the time of discharge. He was brought home, and then I felt like I had no options for protection. So I started on the advice of my lawyer, I started to move forward with a protective order. I started to just kind of gather evidence that I was being emotionally abused. He had never been physical with me, so it's a little harder to prove. Um, the night before the boys died, I came home. I tried to talk to him about separation. I came home from work and tried to talk to him about something having to do with the separation, and he became extremely agitated. I went to dial 911 and he restrained me and took my phone. I fled the house and went to a local gas station where a woman was kind enough to let me use her phone to call the police. The police came to talk to me. I told them what had happened. And then they also went to the house to talk to Shan. I didn't know what was said there. They came out to, after they went in to talk to him, they came out, one of the deputies, because it was the sheriff's department, came out to tell me it's really a he said, she said. He said I attacked him. He said that you have a brother who lives in town, so you should go sleep there. I told him I was worried about the kids. He said the kids feel safe. And he said that I was basically the bigger person by leaving, that it would make me the bigger person, that didn't make me a bad parent to leave. And so at that point, I really didn't have anyone to turn to, empower, no one to empower to turn to help me. So I left the house and I went to sleep at my brother's. The next morning, there were some events that occurred overnight. My husband then tried to have he had gone to the magistrate and filled out he had filled out a paperwork to have me involuntarily committed. The cops came and picked me up at midnight, took me to the ER, evaluated me. I'm a nurse practitioner. It was actually a hospital where I worked. When the nurse did an assessment for domestic violence, it was high. Um, they let me go. As soon as the courthouse opened up, I went to fill out the paperwork for the protective order. While I was there, my husband sent me a text message right before I turned in the paperwork. He sent me a text message that said, "I hope you're happy." And then maybe about 15 minutes later, I started getting text messages and phone calls from my neighbors saying that there was smoke coming from my house and there was fire trucks. I I think then I knew that everyone was dead. I wanted to believe that my husband had just killed himself and not the kids. I had never ever, it had never crossed my mind that he would hurt the kids. I always just thought he would kill himself, and I knew he was going to kill himself. Like he was talking about it multiple times a day. And I thought that he would do it and I thought he would still try to hurt us. Like I thought he would do it in a way that the boys found him or made it seem like my fault but I didn't ever think he would hurt the boys. But I was with my brother. He came to the courthouse with me and I ran out. We ran out of the courthouse. We zoomed to my house in his car. And when I got there, I knew there was just tape everywhere. The road was closed off. I know they only do that when people are dead. It was some time before anyone could tell me anything. So I was just standing there like, what's going on? The investigator finally took me into a private area and told me that there were 3 dead bodies in the home. Later, I was able to get information. I went to the hospital and some friends had taken me to the hospital and some investigators came there to tell me that the boys were asleep when my husband shot them and killed them. He then strategically lit fires around the house to everything I loved. He lit my closet on fire. He lit my art collection on fire. He lit the children's bedrooms on fire. And then he killed himself. And so, yeah, since then, I've seen the body cam footage and the conversation that the cops have had with my husband the night before in the home. Um, they walked in and asked him what happened, and he told them that he restrained me and he told them that he took my phone. They didn't ask him any follow-up questions. He told them that I was seeking a separation and that I had tried to have him involuntarily committed 2 weeks prior to um, get rid of him and get more information from my lawyer. And the deputy's responses were, "Yep, they do it all the time." And then he realized who his audience was, and he said, "Oh yeah, she rage baits me," and then records it for her lawyer. And one of the deputies was like, "Oh man, I know what you're talking about." And he said he got kind of choked up and he was just like, "I don't want, judges always side with the mom, and I'm afraid I'm not going to see my kids again." And again, the deputy was like, "Yep, it happens all the time." And then the conversation turned into, "Sir, what can we do to make you feel safe tonight?" And he said, I just want her off the property for the night. I don't want the kids to have to see that. I want the kids to feel safe." And so
Wow.
I was toast. There was literally no way out
Mm,
safely for me and the boys.
mm, mm. Wow. So much to unpack here. And thank you so much for sharing this devastating, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, infuriating, horrible story. And I have so many questions, and I do want to talk about more in detail about how the village failed you in a second. But I want to talk about something really nuanced and terrifying. Just in the past couple of months, we've heard about a 31-year-old man who shot and killed 8 children, seven of his own, and one nephew in Shreveport, Louisiana in April. And he also shot his wife and another woman who were injured. And then in early May, Houston police discovered a tragic triple murder suicide in an affluent River Oaks neighborhood where a 52-year-old man shot his wife and their 2 young children before killing himself. And so these stories, alongside listening to you and what happened, and it just is devastating. And when I posted just an excerpt of this on social media, so many questions poured in about people are really, really grappling with this and how little space we have to have honest conversations about this. So,
Mhm.
and I really want to be thoughtful here because, it's so nuanced. In my own work with domestic violence, we have survivors who are saying that, well, sometimes abuse stays within a certain bounds, often it escalates, sometimes gradually, sometimes abruptly, and sometimes it's so insidious, kind of like what you discover, that
Yeah.
it's nearly invisible even to the people who are really, really close to it. And it's not unusual that someone says, "Oh, he was wonderful until he wasn't." So like even comes out of the woodworks, this
Yeah.
kind of thing. Or someone said, "Oh, my uncle was my favorite until he became my abuser, and there was no warning that I could see
Yeah.
coming." So sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, these to you before we started the conversation, sometimes it feels like these men are like something inert until they detonate. And that's what makes it especially terrifying and so hard to talk about without falling into oversimplification. There is no calculus, no formula that yields to this very specific result. So I want to ask you something that so many of us, so many people in the audience are sitting with. What do you wish for people to understand about loving someone who gives no obvious warning signs about doing this specific thing? And what do you want people to pay attention to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think my husband was really good at assimilating, right? Like he was really good at when his mental health was more stable, he was really good at fitting in. And and initially, he did exhibit signs of narcissism, and I think initially he was very charming, extremely charming, right? Like extremely charming, extremely helpful, extremely like all the things, and it was sort of after we were married when he was really embedded, because marriage itself, the contract of marriage makes it hard to just walk away, especially when you have children. Yeah, it's not that simple. So when he was really embedded, I think is when the the signs started to pop up like, oh, this is not the person I thought I was marrying. And I think that, but that being said, I do think there were signs in the beginning. It's just the gaslighting is so pervasive that you really question yourself. And you really question like what you're seeing. And I think my first advice to anyone in a relationship with someone who exhibits these behaviors, even though you may not know they're exhibiting them at the time, or you may question whether or not they're exhibiting at the time, my advice would be trust your intuition and don't don't brush little things off and not tell someone about it. Tell someone if you have a questioning of something that makes you feel uneasy or unsafe. Or I um I think that also I would really encourage people not to say to someone that they see in a relationship that they perceive as dangerous or unhealthy or toxic, not to say, why don't you just leave? I think because that creates all this feeling of shame. Like, why don't I just leave? Am I making excuses? I think a much more appropriate question is, do you feel safe to leave? If you wanted to leave, would you feel safe? And go from there.
Mm.
Um, I I honestly, because my husband wasn't hitting me ever, I did not perceive myself as being in an abusive relationship. And I think that it wasn't until this sounds really random because it was, but I was driving in my car a few months before everything happened. Shan's mental health was getting worse and worse and worse. And I was driving in my car and I was listening to a podcast. It was like a true crime podcast. And the hosts were going back and forth talking to each other about this episode they had just, done. And one of the hosts said, if it has ever crossed your mind, ever, that your partner could kill you, there's a reason, and you should follow your intuition. And,
Oof.
and I thought, I have thought that. Like, I have questioned whether or not he was going to go so far off the rails that I was in danger. I used to look at my children, like when we were driving in the car, I used to look at them and I used to think, I hope get to see you grow up. And I didn't think that they were going to die. I thought that I was going to die. And I didn't necessarily always think I would rationalize it like, I don't think Shan's going to kill me. I think just this marriage is going to kill me. Um, and well, so when I heard that podcast host say that, I called the local domestic violence nonprofit here in Raleigh. And I said, I don't know if I am in a dangerous situation, but I feel like I should just call and ask. And so they gave me a lethality assessment, which was different than any assessment I had taken because, you show up to the primary care and you always have those questions. Do you feel safe at home? Do you feel, like just, and for me, I always answered yes because I didn't recognize that I was being emotionally abused. But when I took the lethality assessment, I scored high. And she started counseling me on having a high lethal score in the lethality assessment. It's actually a very easily scored 11 question yes no answer um, assessment, and I don't know why we don't use it more in primary care, in law enforcement. In It's interesting because in the body cam footage, when I watch the deputies talking to my husband, if you were sitting there with a lethality assessment checking boxes, my husband fills it out for you. He admits to having been involuntarily committed a year prior. He admits to assaulting me. He admits, like you could literally sit there and check. He admits to being unemployed, which is one of the questions. You can check all the boxes. Um, so yeah, it is. Um, my advice would be, if follow your intuition. Don't let gaslighting put out the little, even if it's just an ember that still exists, like fan it and follow it.
This is such good advice, and thank you for the nuanced answer, which brings me to this book. It's called Extended Mind, which I refer to sometimes, and it's by Annie Murphy Paul, and it's about how we rely on each other's brains to function, the
Hmm.
village's collective mind, if you will. So, from something as innocuous as, hey, what was the name of that singer? Yeah, someone to really enormous questions like, I'm overwhelmed and terrified and feel unsafe, and I need you to help me think clearly right now, you know?
Yeah,
And so we're not meant to navigate any crisis
yeah,
alone. Our nervous systems are literally wired for co-regulation. We need each other to think, to feel safe, to make good decisions under pressure, etc. And which, like what happened to you makes it so much more devastating. And it brings me to the village question, the systems that were supposed to be our extended mind when we are under duress for your family, for yourself, these peoples and institutions that are designed to see what you might not be able to see alone. Or
yeah.
even worse, some of them were perhaps, it seems like they gaslit you alongside with your
Oh, yeah,
husband, like, and I've
yeah,
seen this over and over again where someone goes who is in a domestic violence situation, they go talk to a loved one, to someone who they think is safe, and it's like, oh, you're exaggerating. It's not really that bad. Da, da, da. You need to do this.
yeah,
Like they put it all on you rather than be like, hey, are you safe?
yeah,
Anyway, so that is loved ones, police, therapists, institutions, all of it.
yeah.
And I want to give you space to talk about that right now a little bit more.
Hmm.
And what did that failure look like in which we talked about some of that, but um, you know, what do you want these systems and the people in them to understand about what it costs you?
Oh, God. Well, first of all, I'll say that I had even asked Shan's psychiatrist a few weeks prior, if he's talking about threatening to commit suicide all the time, are me and the boys in danger? And his psychiatrist's response was, well, does he hit you? And I was like, no. And so that was just one more like, am I crazy? Am I the crazy one? And then when the ER doctor sent him home and the cops didn't believe me, I I'd say this because it's like the best. Anyone who's ever watched Fight Club, the movie, I drove away from the house that night thinking, do I think I'm Ed Norton, the calm one in that movie, but really I'm Brad Pitt, the one who's wildly out of control, and I just don't know that side of my personality. Like I literally drove away thinking, am I two different people? Do I have a split personality? And I think I'm calm and composed and together, but really I'm wildly out of control and need to be institutionalized. Um, I think so. I will say initially and during the time that I was asking for help, I they took away my sense of of they gaslit me and took away my sense of intuition and that I'm in danger and that my kids are in danger. Um, what was lost afterwards? I mean, yeah, I mean, to even talk about myself is impossible. I mean, I still work. I still I see my friends all the time, but I am not the same person. And in some ways I shouldn't be, right? Like I shouldn't I couldn't sit here and talk this way about such a hugely systemic problem if I was the same person. But I mean, the pain is exquisite. I mean, it's just, it is, I know I'm here for a reason. I know because of my belief system, I know I'm still here because I'm supposed to be, but I don't want to be. And I've got a lot of life left ahead of me, but I don't want to be here without my kids. And so that is a really difficult way to feel every day. Um, but I think I think everybody can imagine how it feels. And you can't know, and I don't ever want anyone to have to know. I hate that anyone else does know this pain. But I think you can imagine, even if you're not a parent, what it's like to lose children you love. That it would be so unimaginably painful. But I think the thing that most people don't realize is it was like an atomic bomb was dropped on me, but the ripple effects extended to my family, extended to anyone who had ever encountered me or my family. It extended to a community of 13 and 15-year-olds who loved my children as friends, as best friends. One of my oldest son's best friends, actually had to completely change his school environment because he couldn't go to school and not have River there anymore. Um, I got a text message from one of Jet's, my youngest son, one of his friends. While I was in the hospital for a week after they died, and I got a text message from one of his friends, like, Miss Kerrith, is this true what I saw on the news? I hope it's not, but if it is, I'm so sorry. I can't believe, Jet made us laugh every day. I, I'm getting the chills right now. I think that is what has hurt me uh, afterwards. One of the things that's been so painful is to watch 13 and 15-year-olds try to process this. And one of the things that's been so beautiful is how incredibly emotionally mature and evolved they all are. I mean, they have been just amazing. I think, it's impossible to know what we've lost in not having Jet here and River here with us, through their future. Who knows what they would have ended up contributing. Um, but in the present moment, River worked as a lifeguard. He was really close to the people that he worked with, the other teenagers and young adults that he worked with. And he loved that role and he loved his bosses. And, it's just been devastating to watch. I mean, of course, it's devastating for me to see to witness every day, but it's devastating to watch what a really young community of, and that doesn't even include their teachers, just their swim coaches, their music teachers, it's endless.
Yeah. Endless is so right. Such a good word to use when it comes to a tragic event of this magnitude. what do you wish your community or your village or these systems offered you that they didn't?
Hmm. You know, I, so I feel, despite the tragedy of what I went through, I feel like my grief and recovery, I don't know if you can call it recovery, but my grief process has been very, very supported. I happen to work in hospice and palliative care, so instant supportive community there. I have really good friends. I have supportive family. Um, and I feel very privileged for that in that circumstance because I have learned about how many women go through this um, since this happened, and I was more aware of the situation I was in, that it wasn't actually just me. I wasn't the crazy one. It wasn't me being, this out of control woman, um, trying to be vindictive toward her husband. And now in seeing how many families suffer this, not just in America and I mean around the world, I feel very privileged to have had such an amazing supportive community. I think that the one thing that has been a big question mark for me is why aren't people angrier about this? I think that that's the only thing missing. Like, why are we not protesting every time a woman is killed by um, a violent partner, a violent, unhinged partner? Why aren't we angrier? Why aren't we doing more? And that's something I ask a lot. I ask myself a lot, and think about ways now that, I mean, I'm kind of coming out of a fog, to say the least, but it is one of the things that I think we just need to be louder and angrier and more out there. I will say I I didn't realize the extent of chauvinism and misogyny that exists within men in power. I knew it existed, but I never really knew the way I know now. Um, and I will say that all throughout the entire process of trying to get Chan help and trying to get myself and the boys help, I was very, very cognizant of trying to stay calm. I would tell people just the facts. I would give report like I was giving report to a doctor at work. And because I didn't want to be seen as a hysterical woman.
Absolutely. I mean, this happens all the time, right?
Yeah,
And domestic violence and rape, they're a global pandemic. It's
yeah,
actually not something that is an isolated incident. And unfortunately, so many of the men in the position of power are abusers themselves, which makes it so much more complicated. So I feel like we need to rely on good men that are out there who are
yeah,
against this to really lead the charge to because it's a man's problem for the most part, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, and also, and despite my being calm and not a hysterical woman, I was still labeled that. And so now, I mean, the truth is, I was still labeled that. So no reason to hold back now. I have nothing to lose that could ever equal what I've lost. And yeah, so there's nothing to hold back anymore. I mean, I'm not saying, my plan is to tell my story and be as helpful to whatever or to use my story to implement whatever changes can be implemented. But there's no reason, like it doesn't matter whether you're calm, whether you're hysterical, the labels are going to hit you anyway. So nothing to hold back now.
Such a good point.
hmm
And I want to talk with you forever, and maybe we'll continue this conversation another time,
Yeah.
deeper developments. But before we leave, what else would you like to cover? And where can people find you?
Well, so the only other thing I would say to people is, reach out to your local domestic violence nonprofit. And I would ask them because this is a question I asked and I got a really unsatisfactory answer. I asked after everything happened. Ask them what they're doing besides handing out toiletry bags after the fact. What are they doing to prevent it? And do they need help coming up with plans for prevention? Um, but where people can find me, I'm on Instagram, Kerrith McDowell. It's just my name. I also have a podcast called Dead on Earth with my friend Sarah. She's also a hospice and palliative care nurse practitioner, and we just interview people about their grief and loss stories. And it's really just a storytelling um, podcast. We don't offer advice, nothing like that. We really want to hear stories of what people have experienced. And that is on also on Instagram at the handle Dead on Earth Podcast. And you can reach out to me at info@deadonearthpodcast.com.
Beautiful. And I'll put that in the caption. And I have listened to the podcast, and it's so well produced and so thoughtfully done. So well then, thank you so much. It's been an honor, Kerrith. And yeah, we will continue this conversation because we have to. So
Yeah, I'll keep you posted. Thank you so much for having me.
thank you.
Bye.